I'm Ashley,
And I'm Jasmin.
and you're tuned into Ham Radio Stranger Things podcast.
It's a ham radio.
The Cadillac of ham radios.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to yet another episode of Ham Radio as Stranger Things podcast. We've got a great episode for you today as usual, but first, we have a little housekeeping to take care of, and I'm going to turn it over to Jasmin to let you know where you can find us on social media and where you can listen to the podcast.
Thanks, Ashley. You can find us on Instagram at Ham Radio Media, all one word, on Twitter at HamThrough, on YouTube at Ham Radio Media, or using our handle HamRadio1983. We also have a Discord you can join, which is linked in the description of this episode. If you have a fan theory or question you want to share, you can email us at hamradiomedia@gmail.com. Ashley also has a fanfic on AO3 entitled Stranger Things College, which is also linked in the description. The podcast is available on all major podcasting platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, and much more. If you like the show, please consider leaving us a rating or review. We have a lot of totally tubular stuff coming up, so be sure to follow us on social media to keep up with the podcast and all of our new content. I also wonder, though, why they waited. Like, now that you've said that, I'm like, if it was that urgent, if they knew Henry could come back at any point, like, he was just chilling there with the ability to do this, why did they wait until things were dire? Like, if this is, power of suggestion, if this is possible, why the heck didn't they start doing something as soon as they were moved to California? Like, why did they wait until the world was about to be ended? Like, why did they... If they apparently had this up and running, why did they wait?
Great question.
Another great question, yes.
Yeah, and I feel like that Brenner is not always a very reliable narrator either in that regard, because of what he says in chapter 8 about, when he says, I had no idea what Henry was capable of, even though you just explained, like, not even 20 minutes ago, you just explained how he works. You just explained how he simply doesn't kill, he takes, everything from his victims. And now you're saying, I didn't know that he was capable of murder. Like, dude, what are you talking about?
I mean, he knew, right? Like, he definitely knew. Like, he knew. And, like, I really want to know in season 5, I hope we're going to get into this, which is, what does Owens really know? Because you always get that sense, from the introduction of his character that, he knows more than he's letting on, right? So, and he says in season 4, this is something I've been dreading for a long time. So that presumes he knew from the minute he took over that lab what was possible. So I'm really interested to find out what he knew, what he knew when, and, what he knows now. I'm really curious to find.
So the first time we see the Nina Project is in the similarly titled The Nina Project episode, that being chapter 5. And just some, quick things about the plot in this episode. This is the first time that Eleven goes into the Nina tank after she was drugged and her head was shaved while she was unconscious. And then we learn that these security tapes are all from the week of when the massacre took place. At the lab, and I love the introduction of the orderly here, because immediately, like, I was like, something's up with this guy, I just don't know what it is, and he's super creepy. But I kind of wonder, like, are we meant to believe that this is the first time that 11, had ever encountered the orderly at that point?
I mean, I don't think so. It seems like, I don't know, it's weird. It seems like she doesn't have a relationship with him at first because she seems surprised by him, but it's also hard to say because she that version of her has never seen him. But if so, where was he? Because even when she kind of like succumbs to the memory and becomes like little 11, I don't know, it seems like she doesn't really have like a prior relationship with him.
I thought it was implied that she did, though, because like when she shows up in the rainbow room, he's like, there you are, sleepyhead. And she's like, oh, am I late? And he's like, no, we're just getting started. Like,
that's true.
I think it's unclear.
Yeah. Maybe it's meant to be ambiguous just because maybe like 11 at that age did have a relationship with this guy. Like, I mean, not a relationship, but just, he's one of the orderlies.
Yeah.
But her in the present is like, who the hell is this guy? Because
right.
I mean, she suffered a concussion, and then like, well, we find out she suffered a concussion, and then the effects of fighting Henry, and then was isolated for, the next several years of her life. So I think her brain has seriously suppressed this. Like anybody's brain and body would be confused if that happened to them, I think.
So 11 continues on her journey into her past, and then Owens receives word from Agent Stimson that Hawkins is running out of time, and then he urges Brenner to speed things up. And then of course Brenner's like, she's gonna swim. And then immediately after that happens. And this is something that y'all brought up in your podcast, and I really wanted to talk to you to ask you about it. So 11 begins to have sudden flashbacks of what we come to later learn is the massacre. And so this is something that you brought up on your episode about this. Is it possible that Brenner prematurely inserted the tapes of the massacre to speed up that process?
Yeah, that was sort of my interpretation upon, thousandth watch. At first I did not interpret that at all, but pretty much just in the past watch that I did when we covered that episode or that chapter, that was kind of what I was getting. It sort of seemed like the memories were sort of like splicing in out of order, and we were getting that, as the caption writers would like to call it, jarring stinger every time we were seeing like the bloodied children. And so it felt like they were like inserting a memory where it wasn't supposed to go, which was disrupting Elle's understanding of what was going on, which is part of why I think the cardiac arrest might have happened, because it just wasn't computing correctly in her brain, mixed with the cocktail of whatever drugs they gave her. So to me, it did seem like swim faster meant that Brenner was speeding up the memories.
I know chronologically too, like in the dive, the tape is dated September 5th. So if it is in fact true that Brenner was like, I'm gonna switch this tape and I'm gonna put in September 8th and I'm gonna make her do this quicker, he then backpedaled.
Right.
And goes back to the 5th.
So at least he can recognize that this was a mistake if he did do it.
If he did do it, yeah.
Also, like, I love watching this scene. Like, it's hard to watch, but I loved it. The scene where he's sitting with her in, like, whatever her little room thing is, whatever you want to call that prison cell of, like, a situation. Claiming that, that this place isn't a prison and all that stuff. But just that, like, he seems genuinely surprised that she's not swimming, as he calls it. That, like, she's not able to get past this. It's like, if we're right and he did switch out the tapes, it's like, well, you're jarring her. And like, I think something I really liked about season 4 is that it shows that, like, I think both Brenner and Henry think that Elle is going to be easier to manipulate, and they're expecting the kid they used to know. They're expecting her to be really easy to manipulate and her to respond the way she did in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And they're both really surprised and shocked and angry when they realize no. And even to the very end, Brenner can't quite grasp it. Like, it's like they can't compute with the fact that she's not that child anymore.
Yeah.
And so the techniques aren't working because he's picturing the kid he knew, and Ella's had so many life experiences since then and has come to, recognize that this is wrong. And so it's not working. I think in the state she was in when we saw her in season 1, something like this would have probably worked very quick because, of the state she was in, but now she's not in that state anymore. And she has that, like, cognitive dissonance to recognize that, like, her brain is fighting, right? Like, it knows that this is wrong. So I really liked that scene, and that, like, you can also see Elle start to clock it, being like, okay, you're talking about how, there are no heroes or monsters, and, and it's not a prison, and it's like, but it is. But it is.
That's such a great point. I really hadn't considered that Brenner doesn't know. I mean, Brenner and Owens, neither of them knows Elle now. They don't know who she's become at all.
Nope.
So they're building this whole thing with a person in mind who doesn't exist anymore.
Wow.
So it makes perfect sense that it's not going to work. That is so smart. I did not even think about that.
This is why we talk endlessly about the same thing.
Yes.
So do we. That's like Jasmine and I are always like bouncing this stuff off of each other, and like we'll have multiple conversations over and over and over again, and we feel like we finally have figured it out, and then we realize we don't. But that's okay. It's what keeps us coming back for more. But it's like, it's not that we're ever going to know the true answer to this, but I do think that you could, in your headcanon, make an argument to say that Brenner probably put in the tape from the massacre, because it's like she just got in there. Why is she already having experiencing some of that, like she just got into the water. I mean, it's just happened a little bit too fast for it not to be. And also, that's just, who Brenner is. He pushes. And, usually when he does, it does not lead to anything good. And we see, like, immediately, after that happens, 11 goes into cardiac arrest, and he better just be glad that she's young and is healthy, because she could have died. She could have flatlined, and everyone in the universe would probably have been screwed,
It's a good
So
thing
true.
she didn't flatline.
Yeah, and he never even thought about that. I guarantee it never crossed his mind that this was going to scare her so much that she was going to go into cardiac arrest.
And like to that point, I feel like that's the thing that divides Brenner and Owens to me. I mean, there's other things too, but that's the big dividing line where, and this is my pet theory, but I think I'm right about this, which is that, so what we learned in season 4, to me that says, in season 2, when Will was having the now memories and Owens kept claiming it was like PTSD and it was in his head, right? And I think there was an element to that, but we now know that like the now memories were real, that Will was kind of in a way being pulled into the upside down, and we now know that that was like part of what Henry was doing, or Vecna rather. And with what we get in season 4, my implication there to me is that I'm like, oh, Owens knew this stuff was real. I think he wasn't honest about what it was, because I think he was worried that he was going to scare Will so badly. It was going to scare him so badly that he wouldn't be able to like continue. He wouldn't be able to like walk on. And I think it's the same thing with Elle. Like, not that makes it okay, but after watching season 4, I'm like, oh, I think he's lying here because he's worried. He acknowledges the fact that like these are kids. He's going to scare them. He doesn't want to scare them so badly they don't feel like they can continue. Also, if Tristan Hopper knew the extent of this, they would take them and go as far away as they could possibly get and never return. They would never come back. And obviously the world depends on, them being able to see into what this guy is doing and Elle being able to fight this thing with her powers. If they can't do that, the entire world as we know it ends. So they obviously need them there. They need them to be able to keep walking on, so to speak. Whereas I don't think it's ever occurred to Brenda that this could scare her so badly she'd go into cardiac arrest and die, and then the whole world is just screwed. Like, it's clearly never occurred to Brenner, but it's clearly occurred to Owens, because he clearly has that equipment like on site and is prepared if something happens.
Well, it's interesting that you mention Owens being gentle with Will, particularly in season 2, because as we kind of said at the top, that it's been consistent that memories and the strong emotions associated with them can be more or less like a power source. It makes you wonder, could Will finally confronting what happened to him in season 1 unlock something innate? Like, we don't know. I mean, I know there's been a lot of discussion about, will end up with some kind of ability. And I wonder if they're going to kind of lean on this idea of trauma unlocking something or memories fueling something, because we've spoken about it. Will has really just not acknowledged the events of season 1. So I'm hoping that in season 5 we get that.
Same here. Ashley would tell you this, but I'm totally on that train. I'm 100% on that train. And I've had so many people say to me, like the two things that Ashley and I clocked from the beginning, and my other friends, I watched with too, the fact that like there's something up with Miss Kelly, and the fact that Will keeps touching his neck. And I've had other people say to me, they're like, oh, like I didn't clock that at all. Like, I thought, Miss Kelly's just being a good counselor, and the fact that Will touches his neck, and like that's where Sateria is for when one is at the lab.
Huh.
And yeah.
Huh.
Okay.
God, imagine if they like inserted something in Will in season 2 and like we didn't know.
Oh, I wasn't thinking season 2. I was thinking farther back but yeah, that's possible too.
I mean, he was
like
in
lab.
Owen's care, like going weekly. It was, made to seem that this was like a standing appointment that him and Owens shared.
Right.
Ew,
Yeah.
I hate this. I don't like this at all.
I mean, I wasn't thinking season 2. I was thinking more like, did something happen when Will was a kid that he doesn't remember the same way that Elle did not remember? That was more my train of thought, because I don't know. I feel like, because anyway, we could go down that rabbit hole for years. But just to your point about like, trauma and memory, and I think you're right. I don't think Will has dealt with that at all. I don't yeah, I don't think he's dealt with that at all. And I saw people bring up the point before that, like when we had Robin on the show, she's like, like Max is seeing a counselor about her trauma, but nobody else on this show is. And the number of people who've been horrified when I was like, yeah, I'm pretty sure there's something up with her. Like she's wearing a clock key. Vecna is choosing his victims through her. Pretty sure there's something up there. And people be like, oh, it's like, yeah, that's why we see her getting caps, like, because something is wrong. At least that's my theory. Who knows? I don't know if I'm right or not, but
I think a lot of people shared that
yeah,
perception.
Yeah. But yeah, I definitely think there's going to be there's definitely going to be something as well, and I could definitely see it having to be with repressed trauma and finally dealing with it. And I think that's something that him and Elle share. They both have this this repressed trauma that they're not dealing with. I mean, so many of the characters on the show do, but specifically in relation to this, their powers and connection to the upside down, what we now know to be Henry/Vecna/1. Like Will has this like weird psychic connection that they've never explained or really explored. He just kind of has it. He has an early warning system, and they've never really explained what that is, which to me they have to in 5. And Elle is working to like work through her trauma to fully access her powers, to be strong enough to take him down, right? And I feel that there has to be a connection there. There has to be something about dealing with that trauma and finding a way to move beyond it, in order to access this stuff fully, and that's got to be part of it. I mean, I don't really see how else they would kind of move that forward. You know what I mean?
No, I agree.
And then we see Nina in the dive episode of chapter 6, and most of what happens in this episode really is we get more scenes specifically between 11 and the orderly, but we also get our knowledge of 11 being bullied in 1979 in like one of the more interesting fights I think I've ever seen, like a mine fight. And Angela and her crew, like what they did was really bad and mostly humiliating for her, but what these kids did was, I mean, they could have killed her with what they were doing, and I feel like their bullying of 11 was a little bit worse than what Angela and her friends did. And there's this whole thing of like, who let them out of their rooms? Was it on Papa's orders, or was it the orderly? But I think one of the biggest questions I have specifically of the Nina project as seen in this episode is the orderly brings up to 11 that about the time when Terry, her mother, came to rescue her from the lab. And like he recalls that very vividly. He's like, remember that woman? That was your mother. And so I wonder, from like the writer's perspective here, why and how is this sort of relevant to season 4's plot, or even season 5's plot?
This is some like memory inception in this scene. This is 11 in Nina recalling a memory of Henry, prompting her to recall a different memory when they're sitting in front of what's it called, the Plinko thing, right?
Yeah.
And Henry says to Elle that when he arrived at the lab, like everything changed and he found his strength in a memory. And then he asks 11 if she has a memory like that. And I think, Ashley, that's the part that you're referring to, which is when he brings up, you remember the strange woman who came to get you that one time. And to me, this, to answer your question about how and why is this relevant, this feels like Henry's attempt to guide 11, no different than Kali did, right? On how can we build this child's strength, which he intended on exploiting. So he has a motive here. He wants 11 on his side, and he wants her enraged and to be fueled by a memory, because he knows that works for him. In doing this, he also gains her trust by revealing this to her and jogging her memory, because he essentially reveals Brenner's lie to her, which was an attempt for him to appear truthful and Brenner to appear untruthful, which he is, but they both are. So I think that's how it contributes plot wise.
Yeah, I think also to your point, I don't know if you mentioned this specifically, but when they're sitting at that little thing and he says like, Papa doesn't always tell the truth. Here's an example I'm giving you. Like, I was trustworthy back then and he wasn't. So I think that's also a big point here that Henry is trying to make to her, that, yeah, like I've done some things that are bad or whatever, but like I've told you the truth. And like, I've always believed in your strength. So I think it's like an attempt to either get her on his side, although I don't think he thinks that's going to happen. But I think it's also kind of like an appeal to her. Like, this is why I'm doing this. Don't you understand? Like, you're as powerful as me. Or, you know, I think he understands that maybe she's more powerful than him. And I think maybe he does want her on his side. Maybe he wants her to understand. I don't really know what the end goal is here for him in terms of a relationship with 11 or lack thereof, or if he's just trying to get revenge on her. I don't know, but maybe he feels that like her talent is wasted on you know, being good or whatever. But either way, I think he just wants 11 to trust him in some capacity.
Right. And I definitely think, it's all a part of, trying to manipulate her. As we will see in chapter 7, like that's what he really wanted, was to get her on his side. But I think too, maybe he felt like, well, because of everything that's been happening to her here in the lab, whether that be between the other children, or just because she was stolen at birth, and she's, I mean, not that the other children weren't, but we know that Eleven's mother tried to take her back from Brenner, but regardless, like, we see that Henry understands, like, there's something different about her, and he feels like there's something different about him. And I wonder, too, like, if it is, partly a manipulation thing, but also maybe he feels like this kid is the only one that I feel like I could make that connection with, that would maybe understand what I'm putting out, if you will. And I mean, of course, we know, like, again in chapter 7, like, he wants to take over the world, and he wanted her there with him. So, and I hope that's something, and that's why I hope we get more into Henry and his time at the lab next season, because there's just so many, plot holes, I feel like, in that, and just so many, disconnections of, like, who is he really? How long has he been an orderly here? What happened that, made Brenner think it was okay to make this guy an orderly? You know what I'm saying? It's just, a very tangled web at this point.
I think if there was anything that made Brenner think that it was okay to it was more like, I got to keep my eye on this guy. Like, I got to keep him close. Or, God knows what he'll do.
Exactly. And, as like our, well, he used to produce our show, but now he more helps with like our edits and stuff. But he's one of my good friends from college, Brendan. He and I were talking about it, and about Henry before, and he's like, I hate to even say this, he said, but I think the best thing that Brenner could have really done with Henry, after Brenner realized that Henry could not be controlled and was, not going to work out in this program or what have you, either put him in solitary confinement for the rest of his life, or, euthanization. And it's a very harsh thing to say, but when you look at things in retrospect, it's like, how could, Brenner not have seen that his plan for Henry was not the best one,
That would require Brenner to self-reflect.
Yes.
Stop making the self-reflection there, Brenner.
Yeah, I think it always starts with humility, and then you go from there.
If only Brenner had self-reflected, we might not be here,
It's true.
Little self-reflection might have been a good, like, something I do really like about the whole sequence from when Elle escapes to Brenner's death is, there's a lot of self-reflection in her, and I really do. One thing I do love about this plot is how we see Elle, from a psychological perspective. We see her, she goes there to figure out if she's the monster, and realizes that Papa it's not her. She's made mistakes, but it's her. And then right at the end, when he wants her to forgive him, and she refuses to give him, I do really love that in terms of her character, because I think lots of people have talked about this, but the fact that we rarely get to see storylines on television or in film where something bad happens to you, and as a girl or a woman, you're supposed to just like forgive and forget as if that didn't happen to you. And it's so rare to see a depiction of like, I can acknowledge that what you did was wrong, and I don't have to forgive you, and I don't have to forget about it, and I can just acknowledge it was wrong, and I'm not going to give you that. I don't owe you. You don't owe your abuser anything, right? So I love that for her, and I really like like as hard as it is to watch, it's such a great sequence. But just her realization, like when they're in the Nina Project room, and just like look on her face when she realizes you knew what Henry was capable of, you built a program around him, and this whole time, you made me go in there. You tortured me looking for him because you couldn't let it go. You couldn't admit you were wrong. And all of these people died. And you're still doing it. Like, you want to rebuild this program. You want me to stay here and rebuild this to do more damage. Like, what is wrong with you? Like, how do you not see the destruction? How do you not care? And her realizing that that's what separates her from people like Brenner or Henry or even Kali, who, like, some people just want to watch the world burn, And she's not one of those people. She just wants to, live her life, eat her Eggos, go to the movies, make out with Mike. Like, she doesn't want to watch the world
In
burn.
that order.
In that order, exactly. She just wants to eat her Eggos, man. She's not here to watch the world burn. And like, honestly, love that for her. Love that for her.
You talked about that, Jasmine, and it just made me think of in the grand scheme of things, when you think of Brenner versus Henry. In a way, it's kind of sad when you think about it that, I mean, 11 really doesn't have a dog in this fight, but she's just been caught up in the middle of it. And because of, these guys and their egos and their personalities, what has led to, and she's got to be the one to fix it, because neither one really wants to take any real responsibility, unless you're Henry and you're like, oh yes, I did that, I have destroyed the world, I've making everything the upside down merge into Hawkins or whatever. But and it's just really really crazy when you think about, like, 11 is not the cause for any of this. She just unfortunately got caught up in it, and now this yoke, if you will, has been placed on her, and it's not even her burden, but she takes it upon herself because she cares about other people. And I think that's what really sets 11 apart. It's not really her abilities or how strong her abilities are. It's that she knows how to love others and care about others, even though it could be a total stranger that she doesn't know. Like, if it's the right thing to do, she's going to do the right thing because she's a good, moral, ethically moral person. And I think that's one of the best things about 11.
Yeah, and something I really love about season 4 is that it plays into that. We see that juxtaposition like really, really well, and I like that kind of plays with that idea of like, nature versus nurture. And, and I kind of love that they come down on the side of, Elle realizing that, that like her mother came back for her mother loved her. That's, that scene where she's, going back to her birth, and that her mom came back for her. And that you could make the argument of, well, were they some people are just wired wrong. Like Henry appears to be one of those people who was just wired wrong, appeared to come from a loving family, all that. But I also love that they kind of show us that, Elle, for her part, like a big part of that sense of right and wrong that she has comes from being loved at an early age. That even if she doesn't totally remember that until she recalls it years later, that's a big part of it, being shown that love years later, and how that's like shaped her in comparison to a lot of the other characters we see with powers or with that are kind of manipulating this stuff that they don't really understand.
So then we get into the Nina Project in my favorite episode of the season. Of course, I'm talking about Chapter 7, Massacre at Hawkins' Lab. And, really the big thing that we see here in the memory is when Henry monologues, and then 11 opens the gate of the gate, and pushes him into the upside down like a boss. And so my big question is, can an 8-year-old really understand or comprehend what a "we live in a society" monologue really means?
I mean, go ahead, Amanda.
Oh no, I was just gonna say definitely not. No, she definitely has no idea what he's talking about, and I think it's actually kind of maybe unintentional comic relief watching her say this stuff to this child, or watching him say this stuff to this child.
I feel like maybe she understands that she's dealing with an unhinged person, but I don't think she understands why he's so angry at a society that she's never experienced. She's like, I don't even know what you're talking about.
That's so true.
Eat,
She's
sleep,
like, what is work?
Procreate. What does he say? And he goes off on this whole and die. It's like, all right. And she's like, I'm just 8. Like, I don't know what that means.
I'm
I've never
literally
even
in second
seen
grade.
grass.
Right?
Oh my God.
Oh
No.
Lord. You're so right though.
Or the sun.
Yeah.
God, terrible.
Like, she doesn't even know what a friend is, and like,
Yeah,
by the
or
time
a
we see her in season
promise,
1,
or a lie. She doesn't even know what a lie is,
Yeah.
or a promise.
no, and she's barely been in solitary so long, she's lost the ability to tell time and most of her speaking ability.
Yes.
Like, poor girl. But yeah, like, she obviously doesn't understand. Like, I feel like he's more talking to himself there, because obviously, like, a 7 or 8 year old child is not going to understand. Like, I think you're right. She does understand this is like an unhinged person. Like, you know when someone's not right. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know what you mean, but I know that you don't sound right. Like, I think she probably has enough to know that, like, this person's unhinged and this is a bad guy and I need to do something so he doesn't kill more people. I feel like that's probably the extent of her her understanding in that moment, probably.
Yeah, and I kind of wonder too here if this is more of we're seeing like more of a present day 11 versus a 8-year-old 11, especially like when she says no. I don't really see like her doing that in her as her 8-year-old self. I mean, I can definitely see her like pushing him away because she's frightened at this point of him. But I definitely, it's just the way that she says no. Like, to me, that's so like 15-year-old 11, you know?
Yeah.
And I feel like with that whole plot, you kind of get this mix of, and I think this was intentional, this mix of like who Eleven was at the time and who she is now. Because like her tone, her inflection, who she is now is bleeding into it, because it's the kind of hallucinogenic, like it's real, but it's not real thing. Where I agree, part of it is, it definitely sounds like her now, but parts of it also do sound like she would as a child. And I thought that was cool. I thought that was well done, the way they did that, where they had the younger actress and they had her like coach and direct her, and so you get that interplay between who she is now and who she's then.
That was a very nice touch to have them do that.
Yeah, and I thought it was like a really good, like, responsible use of the technology, because I know there's a lot of like, a lot of concern about how that technology is kind of being used. You know what I mean? And I thought that was like a good thing, that like it looked really cool, it worked really well, and it like respected like both actors and like what they were bringing to it. So I thought that was a really cool example of like how to use this cool technology in like a responsible way that tells like a great story.
And then, as we see, after a little 11 pushes Henry into the upside down in this memory, we cut to the present day, and we see that 11 has regained her abilities. Yay! Probably one of my more favorite points of this episode, because for all intents and purposes, even though up to this point I may not really understand what has been going on, I'm so glad to see that she is now triumph, and that she has, for whatever reason, has now regained her abilities, and it's like, oh, now we can move on. How was that for you guys?
This to me was a little bit of like a truth will set you free type of thing. So she's shouldering this emotional burden, like believing she was responsible for a murderous rampage that she was only recalling in bits and pieces. And once she learned the truth behind the memory, that not only was she not a murderer, but she actually rid the world of the murderer, she was set free. I also think too, it was I trust myself with this power again. And I mean, maybe, that wasn't a thought that was conscious that brought back her powers, but there was a trust regained in herself once she learned that she was not the monster.
It also kind of reminds me of our discussion on Dear Billy, how after Max has that experience in Vecna's mind void, she moves on. She lets him go. And she's able to kind of move past this memory of Billy and the guilt that she felt after going through that experience. And it sort of feels like Nina does, Nina does the same thing for Elle in this way. Like, she sees that she finally has the answer to this question, am I the monster? Like, this question gets answered. She's not. And so she is able to move on and become a better person. So it makes sense to me that she's able to regain her abilities after seeing that and learning the truth, because she, like I was saying earlier, I feel like it helps her know herself better and be more confident.
Absolutely. You could definitely tell this was a true, not really awakening moment for her, but a true breakthrough moment for her, because she's always questioned if she was, the monster or not, even back to season 1. And so I feel like maybe we kind of learned here, like, this is why kind of felt that way is because subconsciously, even though she doesn't remember it, but subconsciously, this is there. She just doesn't remember it. And so now that she does know, like, I did not do this, I'm not responsible, for that, now she, can walk without carrying that heavy burden.
Also, I love that her and Max kind of go on parallel journeys there in season 4, where they're both kind of confronting their trauma in that way and, trying to move beyond it. I love that they have parallel journeys, and I know that people have commented on how, these are two characters that, like, their friendship is such a, wonderful thing that we see come out of the previous seasons, and how much they truly needed each other in this time, but were separated, and how they go on, parallel journeys. I think it's part of what makes her real, like, Elle showing up and realizing that Max isn't okay, because she thought she was fine, and that she's not okay, so heartbreaking at the end of season 4, because they think they've won, they think they've saved the day, and it's like, no, she's not okay. I love how they go on parallel journeys there, and I just it's so well done, but it's so heartbreaking.
And so then we see what I refer to as the biggest stretch in the show, of 11 recalling the moment that she came through the birth canal.
Yeah.
And it's the fact that the Duffers wrote and directed this episode that makes it this moment even worse for me, because I'm like, okay, come on. You've asked a lot of me. You've asked me to spend a lot of disbelief, but this and Hopper's ankles, I can't,
So true.
I can't get behind that. But anyway, like, we see, in season 2 that Elle is born via C-section, but here it seems, at least the way the visual is, like she was born of a natural birth, and it kind of makes me wonder, like, are we seeing this? Why are we being shown this? And does it really matter, the process of her birth? Because I know people have theorized and noticed that the gate to the Upside Down looks a lot like a birth canal.
Yeah. I don't know. That's interesting. I think it's weird, but not unheard of to see a continuity error in the show. So it really could just be that we see, C-section in season 2 and then natural birth in season 4. But I don't know. I think there really is something to the fact that, especially in season 2, that one gate that she emerges from really looks like, birth. Birth. So I feel like that definitely means something, but I'm not so sure that seeing 2 different versions of this event means anything. It might just be a continuity error. That's my thought. I don't know.
Yeah, I think so too, especially considering that the Duffer Brothers openly said, like, yeah, we forgot Will's birthday.
Right.
So I do feel like, as a writer, there are times where you just forget, like, things like that. And season 2 was so long ago. I think, it's okay that they forgot. I mean, it's not, to me, I don't really think it's, that big a deal. It's just something that I noticed, whilst watching the scene, and I just, I wanted to ask you guys' opinion about that. And, this next question I'm going to ask, really, it more or less comes from, like, chapter 8, of season 4, but I do think it is something that you mentioned, errors. It is something that I wonder, is this a moment of an error in continuity, or is this, Vecna being an unreliable narrator, or Brenner or whoever? But we know from Brenner that after 11, pushed Henry in because that she overexerted herself there, and she, went into a coma, and then after she slipped into the coma, like, she lost all her memories of, this time. But, Henry does the same thing in 1959 after, he murdered his family. He also slipped into a coma, but yet he remembers everything that happened. So I wonder, like, why is it that, after she fell unconscious, she lost those memories, but after he fell unconscious, he didn't.
I'm trying to remember. So you're saying that in 1959, when the massacre occurred, right? Or not when the massacre occurred, when, like, the Creel massacre occurred, not the Hawkins massacre. Why is it that Henry didn't lose his memories at that point. Is that correct?
Right.
But then in 79, when 11 banished Henry, she lost her memory.
Right.
I mean, yeah, I hadn't thought of that, and it's not like we haven't seen 11, collapse before without losing her memories. But I also don't know, it could depend on how you measure trauma, right? Like, was Henry really traumatized by killing his family? And if not, then would he suppress that? Versus 11, who just witnessed horror, that is a memory that was deeply traumatic that she would suppress. So I guess it could be like, how do you measure trauma? And maybe Henry really wasn't all that traumatized by what happened in 1959, whereas 11 was traumatized by what happened in 1979.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I was going to say too. Henry wanted to remember what happened. He did it
I mean,
intentionally.
he says that. He says, I'm fueled by, a memory. And maybe that's the memory that fuels him.
Yeah.
Right. And yeah, I think you're right. I think it's because, he's not really, doesn't seem to be very traumatized by him murdering his family, whereas 11 is definitely traumatized by him murdering the other kids. I definitely think he uses his memories more as fuel to, use his powers, where she kind of, maybe doesn't, or at least not in the same way. It's just, I don't know. I just, when I first watched this episode, or when they explained how that all happened, it's just one of those things where I'm like, okay, is that a continuity error, or did they really mean, to write that,
Yeah, I don't interpret it as a continuity error. I think it makes sense.
I think that's one of the things that makes, the anticipation. I cannot say this word. Anticipation. Here we first time speaking apparently. Of season 5 so great is that there's so many little things that they have to stick in terms of the landing for the end of the show, where I feel like they've kept enough things ambiguous up to this point, specifically about the upside down, all of that it's ambiguous enough that many interpretations are possible. But in season 5, they basically have to say this is the truth, this is what happened. And there's so many little things like that it's like, up to this point, it's like, could be a continuity error, could be they're trying to show us something here, and they have to stick that landing in terms of this is the truth and make it all make sense and kind of weave it together, which is going to be a real hat trick, after 4 seasons of setup. But it's also, I think, the thing that makes it the most exciting, right? Because you're like, ooh, what is the truth? What are we going to find out that's going to, bring it all together?
Absolutely. I love the idea of ambiguity around all this, so that, in the 5th and final season, they can really have something to, really have a good twist with, and stick their landing of the show. So I do, I do like, how they're using all of this, even though it looks like a ginormous puzzle that we can't really figure out right now. But I can't wait to see in season 5 when all this all the pieces of the puzzle are finally put together. And then we're going, okay, well now that makes sense. So to wrap up today's episode on the Nina Project as a concept, I think probably the biggest question that we haven't asked or really talked about yet is, do you think there was another way for 11 to regain her powers? If so, what do you think that would have been?
So I think I mentioned this in our Nina Project episode. I think this would have been an excellent way to organically reintroduce Kali to the plot. It would have been awesome to see her brought back in maybe a more positive way, and have her actually take part in the plot in a way that fans can actually appreciate. Because when we did our Lost Sister episode, the thing we really uncovered in doing that episode was that the chapter is maybe poorly written, and maybe, Kali as a character might be poorly written in some ways, but her character, I think, could be really beneficial to the plot. And I think that if she was brought back in a way that was well written and well done, then she could have really been useful. And I think it also would have made this whole idea less of a Deus Ex Machina if Kali had been involved, because we already know that Kali has established her role in Elle's life as a person who has helped her hone in on her powers. So why wouldn't we see her do it again? So I don't know. That's just like my thought. That's the biggest reason that I have issues with the Nina Project as a concept, is because we have a pretty easy solution that would make way more sense, like literally right there in front of us, and they didn't use it.
Yeah, I want to echo that. I hadn't even thought of that until Amanda brought it up when we were doing our own episode. And I also like the point of, we already know Kali in this capacity, so why not just reintroduce something we already know?
And I think too, it would have ended up making Brenner's involvement make even more sense.
Yeah.
Because we could then infer that Kali maybe eventually did track him down.
Oh,
and he was
that's
able
spicy.
to, thank you. And he was able to convince her to help her sister.
That's so good. That's so much of a better segue.
Thank you.
Then, hello, here you go.
Right.
Like,
That's not a Deus Ex Machina.
Right.
That's,
I would agree.
That's what that is not. Yeah.
Yeah. Writer should have called me.
Yeah.
Slightly.
It's certainly a more organic way,
Mhm.
certainly, for that to happen. I honestly don't really know, like, how 11 could have regained them other than they just came back naturally. But that's why I put the question in there so I could ask you guys, because I was like, I really have never really thought of another. After season 4, like, thought of a more better way for her to regain her powers, other than they just came back naturally, or like Carrie, she just eventually reached her breaking point, and they came back. I think it would help too if we knew, like, how her powers really work, and if we're gonna have that explained a little bit in season 5, which I don't really know if we really will. I mean, I hope we do. But I think if you're going to do that, probably not, good in the final season, because I think then it might complicate things, and maybe it's just one of those things that they just need to be like, it is as it is, and we just need to leave it that like that. So, Amanda and Marina, I just want to thank you guys for joining us today. This was so much fun
Thank
talking
you.
about the Nina Project as a concept. A lot of info here, and we only like scratched the surface. There's probably tons more we could have talked about. But again, we didn't want it to be like, oh, let's talk for 8 hours on the Nina Project.
No, thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, we'll have to have you guys on again, some other time. Maybe season 5 comes out, talk about, farming or something, because they've been at a farm filming. That'd be great. Farming as a concept.
There you
Is it
go.
really
Yes.
necessary to life? So, before we get you guys out here, would you like to tell everyone, like, where they can follow you on social media, and where they can listen to your podcast, and kind of like share what you guys have coming up on your podcast?
Yeah, absolutely. So at the moment, we are on a 2-week spring break, but we will be back very soon on March 27th. And you can follow us on Instagram at Starcourt Study Hall, all one word. And we also do have a Discord server where you can join us called Starcourt Study Hall. And coming up, we have our second half of season 4. So right now we actually just finished up the Nina Project and some other one-off episodes. And we will be coming back in a little while with some more season 4 for you.
Yes, and until they come back, you can, of course, listen to them here on our podcast.
That worked out so well.
Yeah, and it was like so cool because I didn't even know that, you guys were going to do that.
Yeah.
I just reached out and was like, this is kind of when Jasmin and I have available.
Mhm.
Would it be able to, like, y'all were like, oh, that's perfect. Like, we're going on a little break, so that'll be, perfect. And I'm like, wow.
Yeah,
the
that worked
stars
out
have
really
aligned.
well.
It really, yeah, the Starcourts have a lot. Okay, I'll stop.
The Starcourts have all right. Well, thank you guys so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you again. And everyone, again, like, go follow Starcourt Study Hall their Instagram, and join their Discord. You will not be disappointed. Like, there's a lot
Aw.
of interesting people in there, like Moose and Teddy.
Yeah.
Or Goose. I'm sorry, not Moose.
Oh, right.
Goose.
Yes.
I'm sorry if Goose is listening. I'm sorry, not Moose, but Goose. And there's some others that it's like, you know, really entertaining, but also listen to their podcast if you haven't already. Like, you will not be disappointed, especially like with their one-off episodes. You know, they, like, I know you guys, you've talked about the real life Penhurst. You've talked about you know, character relationships. Talked about MK Ultra, you know, all the good stuff that's, you know, within Stranger Things. So yeah, you get a nice history lesson with them and recaps. It's all good.
Thank you.
Yep. All right. Until the next time, folks, be strange. And but you know, don't get into any Stranger Things.
It's great advice.
Yes.
And that's our show. If you like what you heard today, be sure to subscribe and tell your friends. Our theme music is provided by Neon Knights, and our sound editing is provided by Ashton Cooper. Thank you for listening to this episode of Ham Radio, a Stranger Things podcast. Please join us next time, same dial, same time.
Over and out.